The Saturn-moon matrix. So this is a theory that was presented by David Icke that basically suggests that the planet Saturn broadcasts a specific frequency, and that frequency is then amplified and projected to Earth by the moon, which he believes to be a man-made, hollowed-out structure that was placed in Earth's orbit for the purpose of relaying this specific frequency from Saturn to Earth. He believes this frequency that Saturn is emitting and that's being amplified to Earth is one that supposedly limits the capability of clear perception of humanity, that traps us in a low-level consciousness, creating a false illusion of reality that is driven by fear, conflict, power, shame, and negative emotions. This is a theory that is sort of rooted in Gnostic ideologies and principles. And David suggests that the purpose of this reality limiting frequency that is essentially enslaving humanity to desolation is to benefit the non-human entities that are said to control and rule over the world, the archons. These archons feed off of the negative vibrations created by the suffering of humanity, and they use it as fuel for their energy the same way we use food to fuel our own energy. The theory gets even more conspiratorial and political, involving reptilian human hybrids as our overlords, powerful elites, and Illuminati type stuff, etc. But that's not the point I'm making here in this video, so you can go and research those finer details on your own if you want to know more about the specifics of the literal theory. What I want to do instead is to take that theory and apply it to astrology, an esoteric view of reality and spirituality in a much less literal but more mystical and metaphysical type of way. So please understand what I'm talking about now involves symbolism and archetypes rather than actually being straightforward and actually literal. So starting with the basics, I'll tell you what Saturn and the moon represent in astrology on a symbolic and spiritual level. Saturn is known as the greater malefic, as well as the lord of karma in Vedic astrology, and it is equated with archetypal figures such as Kronos, Father Time, and the Grim Reaper. Saturn is symbolically the strict father or disciplinary figure. Saturn is representative of degeneration, cyclical time, and cause and effect. It is a planet that imposes restrictions, limitations, rules, authority, challenges, and responsibilities. Saturn demands effort, commitment, dedication, discipline, structure, and sacrifice, often without much of a tangible reward to show for your labor. Saturn is the planet that ultimately leads us to our fulfillment of true potential, self-mastery, and maturity if we choose to rise to the occasion and are able to use the lessons and burdens imposed on us as a means to transform and become a better version of ourselves. So as such, Saturn's archetype is firm and rigid, demanding of respect, authoritative, wise, and strategic. It is enduring, suffering, learning from those experiences, and evolving spiritually as a result. To me, this is the frequency being broadcast from Saturn. It invokes negative emotions because of its relationship to suffering, and how that suffering is often necessary for true spiritual development. The moon, on the other hand, in astrology is the archetype of the mother, the womb, and the intuition. The moon is symbolic of the psyche, or the subconscious mind, the private innermost being of an individual, sometimes unbeknownst even to themselves. It involves emotional sensitivity, receptivity, depth, empathy, nurturing, comfort, safety, protection, and natural rhythms. It is the planet of feeling and reacting to those feelings accordingly. So it has a lot to do with deeper behavioral patterns that are ingrained in us, with how we internalize our experiences and how we interact with and connect to our environment on an emotional level. It makes sense that this would be the amplifier for Saturn's frequency of limitation and oppression. Biologically speaking, our emotions are impulses that are meant to indicate a need to take action in the world. However, if the underlying subconscious conditioning and programming is maladaptive and defective, then our response to those emotional indicators will most likely be problematic or destructive. Another interesting aspect of this matrix to me involves the signs over which these planets rule in astrology. specifically in modern astrology, where the moon rules over the sign of Cancer and Saturn rules over the sign of Capricorn. Although in classic astrology, Saturn also rules over the sign of Aquarius. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Anyways, these two signs, Cancer and Capricorn, are polarities or sister signs, meaning they sit in opposition to one another on the zodiac wheel and thus have a special complementary relationship to one another, having contrasting themes and qualities while being yoked by a common foundational similitude. Cancer is the nurturing and sensitive mother or wife, emotional, protective, receptive, and feminine. Capricorn is the practical and ambitious father or husband, industrious, calculated, decisive, influential, and dominant. In addition to this symbiotic relationship shared by these two signs, then consider the association of the sign of Cancer being known as the gate of men, while the sign of Capricorn is known as the gate of the gods. Essentially, it is at the gate of men in the constellation of Cancer where the souls of mankind were believed to descend into the material plane to be born into the world. It is like the cosmic chrysalis or womb of incarnation and generation. This primordial womb is the place where souls of men are imprinted with emotional and ancestral memory, providing a window into the soul's history. At the gate of the gods in the constellation of Capricorn is where those same souls again depart from this material reality and ascend beyond its confines. It is the gate of physical death, where the soul departs the body and moves beyond the corporeal world into the spiritual or metaphysical realms once more. It is the pinnacle of the life cycle where the soul has reached its maximum ability for transformation and evolution within this particular lifetime, and thus must move on. The gate of the gods and the gate of men are a part of the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian astrology, which of course is the foundation for all of the different kinds of astrology that would come on later. Interestingly, the ancient Phoenicians were worshippers of the god Kronos, representative of Saturn, which rules Capricorn. Not to mention the Phoenicians had very intimate relationships with all of the different peoples of the Fertile Crescent in the ancient world, and went on to intermingle with them. This would include the Babylonian Empire, which was at one point in direct rulership of the Phoenician Empire at one point. It is worth mentioning considering the Phoenicians' contributions to civilization, namely their creation of the first written language and alphabet, which was the blueprint for the Greek and Latin languages, and also influenced parts of other language families, including Hebrew, Egyptian, Arabic, Aramaic, and Akkadian, to name a few. And considering Babylon literally translates as Gate of the Gods, we can see the direct connection between Saturn and the influence of its archetype on the evolution of human culture. Now, to take it even a step further, we can look at the archetype of the other sign that Saturn rules in classic astrology, which is Aquarius. Aquarius's polarity or sister sign is Leo, which is ruled by the sun. The sun has a long history of being revered and worshipped by the many different cultures that have come and gone throughout human civilization. It is especially important to the Gnostics, as it is seen as being a potential source of oppression, but also the key for following the path to enlightenment and true illumination. It is indeed interesting to consider this as a combination with how the ancient Eastern cultures at the cradle of civilization referred to the Saturn as the black sun or the sun of night. So with Aquarius and Leo, we have the sun and the black sun. In astrology, the sun represents the true self. It is the spiritual truth within, the divine spark, and the self-sovereignty of an individual in the innermost being. It relates to creation, to authenticity, to courage, and to joy. However, it also relates to themes of hubris, pride, and a need for worship and praise. The mythic figure of Icarus is one I like to attribute to the archetype of Leo most often, but we have a vast multitude of sun deities to call upon for more clarity on the nuances of the Leo archetype. Aquarius, on the other hand, represents an archetype of divine, otherworldly insight and wisdom, comparable to that of an oracle. The mythic figure Prometheus is most notable to me for Aquarius. Aquarius is the proverbial light bearer, the figure who is meant to pour out the truth of revelation of higher knowledge and deeper understanding onto the earth and its inhabitants below. Aquarius, through its rebellious and independent spirit and its unique perspective, dismantles and revolutionizes systems and infrastructure that is no longer serving the interest of the greater good. It is meant to open up the eyes of humanity and liberate the entirety of its collective to actually think for themselves and no longer accept things just because it is what we've always done or is what we have been told. That is the black sun part of Saturn.